Thank you for coming today. As you all know, September is ABR's Safety Month. And of course, we have all been reminded recently of what happened in Arkansas. So, you know, it's really important for you guys to be here. Today, we've got Sheriff Van Dyken here, who's going to kind of go over some of the protocols that, you know, we should be doing. We all know, we've all sat through our safety, you know, I lost it. So anyway, program, there's a word. I've been up since like 10 too. I'm like, I don't know. It is still Monday. It is still Monday. That's early for me, yeah. So anyway, you know, we've all sat through the program. You know what you're supposed to be doing. You should be, your office should be, you know, taking photocopies of their licenses when they come in, and y'all know you don't do that. You know, you should be calling in, you should have a safety word, you know, all of the things. Guys, this is not only our, you know, our income producing job, but it's your life you're thinking about here, guys. I mean, there are things that, A, you can't control, but there are things here that you really need to pay attention to. So, in light of that, Sheriff, if you'd like to, we would love to hear what you've got to say. So please give him a thank you.
Good afternoon. I hope everybody is doing well. I know everybody's probably sitting back and reassessing a few things after this tragedy in Arkansas about what you do for a living. And in some ways, what you're facing is similar to what we face in law enforcement, in that when we go out every day, we want to be able to treat folks and be that friendly person and have those friendly interactions. But you always have to keep in the back of your mind that not everybody that you're dealing with is safe, or they have an agenda or an intent to do you harm. This lady in Arkansas, it's pretty much coming to light that this individual had a plan in place. He was not what we refer to as a disorganized offender, but he was very organized, not so much opportunistic, but he had seen something that he wanted to do, as evil as it was, and put together a plan around that, which resulted in this lady losing her life. So what we want to do today is talk a little bit about the things that you can do that don't just dominate your life every day, because none of us can hold up to that. We call it in our world hypervigilance, which is very destructive for law enforcement officers. If we can't find a way to incorporate what we do safely into everyday life, it becomes a little overwhelming, and it's pretty hard on you psychologically and physically to deal with. So that's what we want to do today. We want to talk about some things that hopefully you guys, just simple 1, 2, 3 little practices that you can take away that hopefully will up your sense of security and safety and make you more safe and secure when you're out here doing your job. Now, my wife has worked in the real estate field, and I can tell you, it used to terrify me. But in my line of work, everybody that we always see the worst case scenarios, right? So we go around looking for that felony in progress, and thank goodness the world isn't that way. But it is very scary to think that you guys are going out a lot of times meeting one-on-one with individuals in places that are uninhabited, that if they have some sort of a plan in place and you don't, then it's going to be a dangerous situation for y'all. So we'll move on today and talk a little bit about what we're here to try to learn today. Next slide, Alan. And I want to thank Alan Rosenthal for helping me out today. We actually have his computer up here running the PowerPoint. Now, I knew that we were on the same sheet of music when Nancy sent out the handout that you guys were going to get. And I was thinking about Gavin DeBecker, because we have used that book to train. There's an author by the name of Gavin DeBecker, and he wrote a book called The Gift of Fear. And we'll get into that in depth just a little bit. You guys ever heard of Malcolm Gladwell? He used to write for the New Yorker, has written several best-selling books. He's a great author. He's great to read. But he wrote a book called Blink, that we use quite a bit in law enforcement training. And it's a whole lot about the same thing that DeBecker writes about. But the article that you got today is Miss Tracy Hawkins, Put Your Gut in Your Safety Toolbox. Now here's the whole crux of what the author who wrote for the realtors wrote about, as well as DeBecker and as well as Gladwell. If you feel that you are not safe and secure for some reason, you walk into a particular place, you meet with a particular person, and all of a sudden you feel this overwhelming emotion that something's wrong here. The moral of today is, it probably is. Now, when we go back, and here's a lot of problems that we have in law enforcement, when we go back to eyewitness testimony, a lot of times people's reaction and what they take is very correct, but when they try to go back and account for the reasons why, it is extremely hard to do that. Gavin DeBecker refers to the gift of fear as kind of like the sixth sense, and it's not that you have a sixth sense, it's just that all five senses are working in conjunction, and it's giving you a thought or an idea that something is wrong, and a lot of times we don't listen to those things, especially if we can't go back and put our finger on exactly why we feel that way. Malcolm Gladwell writes a little bit more in detail about it. He calls it thin slicing, and he says that the human brain processes thousands of thoughts every minute. And it's going in, it's processing all these pieces of information from all the other senses that we have. And your brain is automatically sending signals, and a lot of times it's not the cognitive, it's the limbic brain. It's the brain that's attached to emotions and survival and those type of things. It's that limbic brain that's telling you something's wrong here. And what Gladwell found in the research is when they go back and they try to get people to articulate why, they're not accurate in the reasons, but they're very accurate in the thought and the feeling. So what is happening is, as you're processing, you're taking in something that doesn't sit right. It could be a nonverbal communication. It could be a body posture. It could be something that's telling you, whether you can cognitively figure it out or not, that this person may be meaning to do you harm. There is something off in that communication. Next slide. When we talk, next one down. When we talk a lot about situational awareness, we train law enforcement officers, and when we get into personal safety things that you can do, we're going to talk about personal defense. We're going to talk about firearms, chemical munitions, electronic devices, and impact weapons. Okay? We're going to hit on those things. Here's what we talk with law enforcement officers about. You can be the most skilled person in defensive tactics, in whatever less than lethal use of force you have, right up until using your firearm, but if you don't have good situational awareness, it will never come into play. And what that means is, if you're not constantly evaluating your environment as a matter of habit, then you can have all the skills to defend yourself, but if you don't see the threat coming, then it's too late, right? You guys get where I'm coming from. That's the reason why when people take a situation like personal safety or an issue like that, and they try to make it an issue around firearms or carrying concealed or personal defense, I'm kind of like, well, you're getting the cart before the horse kind of thing. Because your situational awareness and having a plan in place and being very aware of your environment is the first step in making sure that you stay safe. The author that wrote the article that you have today, a couple other points that she made is, when you have that gut feeling of danger, act on it. Be willing to let a potential client go. Now, my wife got in the real estate business in 2008 and 2009, and that was a real tough thing to do, right? Let a client go in 2008, 2009. I mean, you guys are in this business to do well, maximize sales, have good relationships, which means you want to be very friendly and you want to accommodate that customer. Well, there's a fine line there where there comes a time when you look at it and the potential risk is just way more than what the outcome would be, even if that client buys and they end up not being a threat to you. When you feel those things and you know those things, dig a little further into the background. It's pretty easy to find. North Carolina has a Department of Justice has a website on there for registered sex offenders in the state. Run the individual through there. Make sure that you're getting a valid name and ID on the individual. And if there's something that just puts you aback about them, that's the great thing about living in the world of the information superhighway. There's plenty of websites, governmental websites, that you can go to and check the background on this individual that you're getting ready to go spend probably at some point in time one-on-one time with. At some point in time, you're going to make that decision. This person's either okay or they're not. Because how many of you sail to at the first house when the person comes along? I mean, generally, you show them several houses, it's several encounters, you're going around, and you have to get to that place of comfort. So what I'm saying is, it's probably unrealistic to think that you're going to do this 100% of the time with this individual once you take them in as a client. But if you have that feeling, do your homework up front before you give them that opportunity to let your guard down, your situational awareness down, and you start showing multiple properties, meeting them by yourself, doing that kind of thing. Does that make sense to you guys? Is that not really a hard place to be when you're trying to decide, is this the kind of person that I'm just going to go meet without having somebody with me or a game plan in place? Now, there's a couple of things I'm going to suggest to you today. Even if you would think I'm going to sell this person a home and I'm going to invite them to my house to eat dinner with my family. That's how much you trust and think. Some of these things I'm going to tell you to do regardless. Okay? Do them every time. Make them a point of habit. That way, if the worst case scenario comes about, then you're prepared to deal with it. Next one. Don't sacrifice your safety for politeness. People will really understand, especially in light of what's just happened, if you very nicely say, I'm not going to meet with you one-on-one until I have you meet at the office and I have a copy of your driver's license or some valid form of ID. Who's going to question that? You wouldn't. And most people are pretty reasonable. That's another thing we have in law enforcement and in the court process. We call it the reasonable person doctrine. Reasonable officer, reasonable person. What you're asking the individual to do is very reasonable in light of today's circumstances. Let's talk a little bit about how we train law enforcement officers when we talk about situational awareness. And what we find out is we have to be careful with our officers because we train. We have something called a reticulating activation system, which means we always view things in the negative as human beings. Do you guys believe that? Even if you're a positive person, we tend to be more negative as human beings. I'll prove it to you. You have the greatest day in the world at work, and you have one bad thing where somebody calls up and really upsets you and you have a bad interaction that day. How do you color that day? By all the positive or by the one negative thing that took place? And that's a normal human response, okay? So a lot of times with officers, we take something we take that reticulating activation system and we highly tune that thing to where officers become pretty hypervigilant. We can sometimes tend to take a very cynical look at the world because of the things that we deal with, and we try to work not to do that, but at the same time to keep them safe. So we talk a lot about color code awareness. You can't walk in, if you're a law enforcement officer, in every room you walk into, you expect a felony in progress to take place, you're probably not going to live very long, right? You're probably going to be too hypervigilant to lead much of a productive life. So we talk about this color code, and this is something that I would suggest to you guys when it comes to evaluating your surroundings and your environment. We put it in colors to kind of reflect where your mental state is. White, that's when you're at home watching TV, relaxing, reading a book, where you feel completely safe and you're really not worried about a threat. Basically, your mind is kicked up into neutral. Even if you're cognitively concentrating on something like reading a book or watching TV, you're really not paying much attention to your surroundings. I've been accused of driving in white, and it's probably true. You shouldn't, but sometimes it happens. Next. Yellow. Something has taken place, and it has heightened your elevation of awareness that there could possibly be a threat, something that might make you take some sort of action. There could be a threat to your personal safety. Next. Orange. That is a strong feeling of fear or threat from an individual or a situation. And I can give you a lot of different scenarios with this. One thing that when we train law enforcement officers, if you're working and you're wearing a uniform, unless you're in the station or unless you're in a secured environment doing a report or something, you never go into white. You're always aware of your personal situations. When I go into a restaurant, still to this day, it is very hard for me to set to where I can't observe what's going on in the room. If any of you know or are married to law enforcement officers, I don't have to tell you about that. You probably see and live with that every day. So when we work, we never go below the state of yellow unless we're somewhere in a secured environment doing a report or something of that nature. Orange, yellow is a heightened state of awareness, and I would put that as this. Officers out working, they go into a convenience store 11:30 at night, you got a lot of glass in front of the building, and this is all relevant to what you guys are doing when we're getting there. So you go into a convenience store late at night, if you don't know what's going on inside that convenience store before you step into the doorway, you're not operating at a level of awareness that you need to. Now, how does that relate to realtors? You guys are showing up on a property, and you don't do a quick evaluation of maybe the property's been broken into, or an entranceway has been breached, or something. You've been showing this property, and you step up and something's different. And you don't stop long enough to stay outside to figure out what it is before you take that key and walk in the door. Before you open that box, take the key and walk in the door. Then you're not at the state of awareness that you guys need to be at, okay? The best defense is not getting a situation to where you're at risk. So orange is a strong feeling of fear or threat from an individual or situation. Now here's the important next couple of pieces. Next one now. Red is when it has hit the fan. Y'all know what it is. So you're standing there and you're facing a deadly threat or serious bodily injury from a situation, whether that's brought about by an individual, or you're driving down the road and something happens and all of a sudden it wrecks in front of you, or you're around the corner and there's a tree across the road, that kind of thing. If you're already operating in yellow and towards the end of orange, if red happens, your fight or flight mechanism will work correctly if you have a plan in place. Okay? If you are operating in white and all of a sudden red is staring you in the face, then the next thing happens. Next. You go into black, which is sensory overload. Your fight or flight response occurs, but you have no plan of action in place, and your reaction response shuts down. Okay? That's when you get folks who are, you've heard the term paralyzed by fear. That's what happens, because the body's kind of not ramped up to deal with a particular threat. There's no plan in place, and all of a sudden it's sitting right there in front of you, and most people, normal human reaction, they get overloaded and they just freeze up. Okay? And that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what you do. Law enforcement officers are just as susceptible to this as anybody else in the population. So it's really important as you move down this scale to realize if you don't have that awareness going on, and you don't start picking up on those things, and you go to yellow and orange, if you go from white to red, you're probably not going to